American leaders said history would remember this war as a fight for freedom. They called it a necessary stand, a moral obligation, a clear battle between good and evil, between democracy and communism. But history, when spoken slowly and honestly, tells a very different story. A story not of sudden decisions, but of gradual mistakes, not of heroic clarity, but of quiet denial. Because the Vietnam War did not begin with bombs falling from the sky or helicopters slicing through jungle air. It did not begin on a battlefield at all. It began in offices, in meeting rooms, in documents signed far away by men who would never step into the heat, the mud, or the fear of the war they approved. It began with misunderstanding, deep misunderstanding, of culture, of history, of people who had already survived more suffering than most nations could imagine. And it began with arrogance, the kind of arrogance that believes power automatically equals understanding, that technology can replace wisdom, that military strength can override memory. Long before the first American soldier ever set foot in the jungles of Southeast Asia, Vietnam itself had already lived through centuries of pain. Foreign rule, foreign armies, foreign flags raised over Vietnamese soil. China, Japan, France. Each empire arrived convinced it would succeed where others failed. Each one eventually learned the same lesson. Vietnam could be occupied, but it could not be owned. This history shaped the Vietnamese people. It taught them patience instead of panic, endurance instead of surrender. They learned how to wait, how to disappear, how to survive long enough for invaders to grow tired and leave. By the mid-20th century, Vietnam was not dreaming of revolution. It was dreaming of independence. And standing at the center of that dream was a man history would later reduce to a single label, Ho Chi Minh. To the West, he became a symbol of communism, a threat, a red flag. But to millions of Vietnamese, he was something else entirely. He was the voice of self-rule, a man who had spent decades abroad, watching empires rise and fall, learning how the world truly worked. He admired the American Revolution, not as propaganda, but as inspiration. He studied it, he quoted it, he believed in it. So deeply, in fact, that when Vietnam declared independence in 1945, Ho Chi Minh opened his speech by quoting the United States Declaration of Independence word for word. He believed this would matter. He believed America would recognize a familiar struggle. After World War II ended, Ho Chi Minh waited. He did not rush to war. He did not attack American interests. Instead, he wrote letters, formal letters, respectful letters, asking the United States to support Vietnam's independence and help prevent another colonial occupation. Those letters were ignored, one by one, unread, unanswered. America had other priorities. The Cold War was beginning. Fear was spreading faster than understanding. And Vietnam, to Washington, was no longer a nation with a history. It was a square on a global chessboard. The United States chose fear over familiarity, influence over ideals, strategy over sympathy. Instead of supporting Vietnamese independence, America backed France's attempt to reclaim its former colony, a decision that quietly betrayed everything the United States claimed to stand for. When France was finally defeated in 1954, after years of brutal fighting, Vietnam was shattered but hopeful. The country was divided into North and South, not as a permanent border, but as a temporary measure, a pause before national elections that would reunite the country. Those elections never happened, because American intelligence reports made one thing painfully clear: Ho Chi Minh would win, and democracy, in this case, was suddenly considered too dangerous. So the United States supported South Vietnam, a government built quickly, poorly, propped up by money and weapons rather than legitimacy. It was a government that jailed critics, silenced opposition, and alienated the very people it claimed to protect. Resistance grew, not because villagers wanted communism, but because they wanted dignity. And America responded the only way it knew how, by convincing itself that this problem could be managed, controlled, solved quietly, with advisors. Just advisors, not soldiers, not war. Just a small presence, temporary. That was the lie. The seeds of conflict. At first, America's involvement seemed distant. Military advisors arrived quietly, training the South Vietnamese army, offering guidance, assessing threats. But the advisors themselves were under pressure to produce results, often exaggerating dangers to justify more support. Meanwhile, the North built a resilient system. Ho Chi Minh's leadership emphasized unity, patience, and strategic endurance. The Viet Minh and later the Viet Cong adapted to harsh conditions, using the jungle as a shield, tunnels as fortresses, and local support as strength. The conflict was not just military, it was cultural, political, and ideological. Villagers were caught in the middle, often forced to choose sides for survival. Resistance did not always mean ideology. It often meant refusing to accept corruption, oppression, or humiliation. The United States, increasingly paranoid about communist expansion, interpreted every act of resistance as proof of a communist conspiracy. Policies were shaped by fear, not understanding. By the late 1950s, the situation was escalating. South Vietnam's government remained weak, corrupt, and unpopular. North Vietnam strengthened its networks in the south, organizing underground movements, quietly mobilizing support, and preparing for a long struggle. America was already committing more resources, money, training, and eventually troops to prevent what it perceived as a domino effect in Southeast Asia. Every misstep in strategy, every misread signal increased the likelihood of a full-scale war. Escalation and entrapment. The 1960s marked a turning point. Guerrilla attacks became more frequent. American advisors were no longer enough. Presidents saw the problem as military, not political, and began sending combat troops. The war expanded rapidly. Helicopters transported soldiers into dense jungles. Bombs rained down on villages suspected of harboring insurgents. Cities became targets of search and destroy missions. Every action created unintended consequences. American soldiers faced a relentless enemy. Viet Cong fighters blended into the population, striking suddenly and disappearing. The jungles, swamps, and mountains became arenas where conventional military power often failed. Back home, public opinion started to shift as reports of casualties and atrocities spread. Television brought the war into living rooms, revealing the brutal reality that policymakers had hoped to control from afar. The United States found itself trapped. Military strength could not guarantee victory. Technology could not replace local knowledge. The very tools meant to project power were also amplifying resistance and resentment. The human cost. By the late 1960s, the Vietnam War became a symbol of moral ambiguity. Soldiers endured extreme conditions, witnessing death, suffering, and the collapse of order. Civilians lived in constant fear, caught between airstrikes, ground operations, and insurgent tactics. Families were torn apart, villages destroyed, traditional ways of life disrupted. Millions of Vietnamese suffered, not because they chose ideology, but because they lived where history repeatedly brought armies to fight over power they did not claim. American society faced its own crisis. Draft protests, marches, and widespread dissent revealed deep divisions. The war was no longer just a distant struggle. It was a national trauma, challenging the very identity of the United States. Lessons and legacy. Eventually, America withdrew. Vietnam was reunified under the North, but at an unimaginable cost. Millions of lives lost,
landscapes scarred, and societies traumatized. The Vietnam War left lessons that echo across history. Power cannot replace understanding. Military strength cannot erase culture or memory. Technology alone cannot solve problems rooted in history, identity, and human resilience. Ho Chi Minh's vision of independence survived centuries of foreign rule, invasions, and occupations. His people endured, teaching patience, endurance, and strategic wisdom. And despite America's failure to grasp the complexity of Vietnam, the story remains a reminder. Arrogance and fear can blind even the most powerful nations. History, when spoken slowly and honestly, does not celebrate triumph. It warns, reflects, and teaches. And the Vietnam War, more than any single battle, stands as a cautionary tale of misunderstanding,